the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Let's start with a note from Melissa. She says, before I began listening to Relevant Radio and I grew to understand my faith better, I was a bridesmaid in two different weddings where one of the betrotheds were Catholic, but they did not get married in a church and did not have a dispensation, to my knowledge. In one wedding, the groom was Catholic. I was a bridesmaid for my future sister-in-law, and in the other wedding, the bride was Catholic. Neither got married in a church. It recently occurred to me that I should not have participated as bridesmaids in either wedding, as a bridesmaid, in either wedding. Is this something I need to confess? Thank you in advance for your thoughts. And she has some really nice words at the end of the email, which we appreciate, Melissa. Thank you. And I pass those along to Cyrus, too. So my answer at first blush here would be, no, I don't think so. If you didn't know, I mean, you didn't have this knowledge in your mind, or you weren't clear on, for example, what does the church require for Catholics when it comes to getting married so it'll be a valid wedding. And you genuinely didn't know, at least it sounds like you genuinely didn't know. And in order to be formally guilty of a sin, and there are people who would tell you it's not even a sin to attend a wedding like that. I would argue that it goes in the direction of scandal. And also it's incoherent to go and celebrate something that if you know it's invalid, why would you celebrate? But that's a separate discussion. So I'm sure there are people who would say, Patrick's too rigorous on this issue. It's not a sin. And I would say the same thing. It's not a sin. It wouldn't be a sin, technically speaking, and certainly not since you didn't know about it. You didn't realize it. So an easy fix for this kind of thing will always be, if anything is bothering you, if your conscience troubles you, even if it's something minor, you can never go wrong if when you go to confession, you just mention it. And you could say, I'm not even sure if this is a sin, but it's been bothering my conscience. I didn't know back in the day, and I was bridesmaid, participated to the hilt, etc. And then I found out problems with that kind of thing. And I don't know if it's a sin, Father, but I just want to mention it because it's bothering my conscience. And then you're done. You've left it at the foot of the cross, and you can say sayonara because you've done the right thing. And then, of course, going forward, you would make your decisions accordingly about whether or not to participate in future marriages. This is one of those things, and thank you, Melissa, for the email. I appreciate it. This is one of those things where there is a division of opinion. In other words, I do believe that my way of looking at this issue, which is more rigorous, I grant that, is not the typical reaction you would get from a Catholic, including Catholic priests. I think generally speaking, most people would disagree with me. And they would think I'm being too rigorous, and they would say, it's okay, you can go. Nancy and I were talking, and she was relating to me a conversation she had with a mutual friend, a couple that we know, but the wife was telling her about some really, heartache situations where some of their kids had gotten married out of the church, Catholic, raised Catholic, homeschooled, etc. And the mother and father went, and, I had never talked to them about this because it never came up, but they went because they got advice to say, it's okay to go, just don't celebrate it. Don't participate in the wedding and don't celebrate it, but go ahead and go. And that is a school of thought, and is probably the majority school of thought. If you were to ask 10 different Catholics, including 10 different Catholic priests, chances are that's probably what you would hear. So I just want to, make it clear that I realize that the advice that I give on this issue is out of the mainstream, but I have a reason for looking at it this way. And it always brings me back to the issue of St. John the Baptist. And usually I will invoke him when this topic comes up. Because if you go back to the gospel story about St. John the Baptist and what happened to him, the whole point of him being arrested and thrown into prison and eventually his head chopped off is because he spoke out against an invalid marriage. That was the basis for the whole drama. It was an invalid marriage. Herod was marrying his brother's wife, who, by the way, happened to be both Herod's and his brother's niece. So there's this incest dimension of that story, which makes it all the weirder. But we don't have to get into all that. But even without that weirdness involved, it was clearly an invalid marriage. St. John the Baptist spoke up against it. He got put in prison. He was speaking publicly all the livelong day for quite a while, and Herod didn't bother with him. He was calling people to repentance and baptizing them for repentance and prepare ye the way of the Lord, and all of his preachments and everything he was doing didn't get him into any trouble whatsoever. It was when he began to speak out against this invalid marriage, that's when he got zapped. So, long story short, for me, I can't square that circle. Maybe other people can. Okay, that's cool. I can't. What I mean is, if St. John the Baptist was imprisoned for speaking out against the invalid marriage, and can you imagine if King Herod goes down into that dark, dank dungeon, and there is St. John the Baptist, and he's in chains, and the rats are running around the prison cell, and is dripping water, and he hasn't eaten for a couple of days. And can you imagine King Herod going down there and saying, look, okay, I understand you don't agree with this. I get it. I understand. But just to keep the lines of communication open, just, for family unity, would you just go to the wedding? You don't even have to go to the wedding. Can you just come to the reception? It's going to be a lot of great food. You haven't eaten in a while, by the way. We'll get you some nice clothes. And you don't even have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. Could you just come and be at the reception for family togetherness? That's why, in my mind, I can't square the circle, because I can't imagine St. John the Baptist saying, well, okay, I don't approve, which is, of course, why I'm in chains here in this dungeon, after all. But I don't approve, and I want you to know I don't approve, and what you're doing is not right, but I'll go and I'll celebrate. I can't imagine, because it's ludicrous to imagine that St. John the Baptist would do that. So for me, that's where the buck stops, because I can't get past that. So I say to myself, if St. John the Baptist was not going to back down, and he wasn't going to go along to get along, and he wound up losing his head as a result of taking that stand, then what should I do if I'm ever faced with a similar situation? So that's it. That's my logic. That's where I'm coming from. I realize, again, plenty of people don't agree with me. I'm okay with that. But if ever you want to know why I hold that view, that's why. Like what you just heard? Share it with your family and friends. And thanks for listening.